is trying to sing when he can't. But that's because I'm so excited. Sometime in July 1911, an American explorer called Hiram Bingham climbed up a very steep hill in central Peru, and he discovered a lost city of the Incas. It was called Machu Picchu. At that time, no one had heard of it, no one went there. But now, they've all heard of it, and they all want to go there, including me. I'm here for very obvious reasons. I want to see the landscape being adapted and changed by man. Man at his most skillful and dogged. And that means examining the handiwork of the Incas. Where you or I build things on the ground, the Inca built them in the clouds. The thing about Machu Picchu, the reason why I turn to jelly up here with pleasure, is that the whole place makes no sense. Why do all this all the way up here? We're not on any strategic route between anywhere and anywhere else. It's a terrible place to grow things, an unimaginable place to build things. The effort that went into creating that is scary. So why do it? The answer hits you as soon as you open your eyes up here. Whichever way you look, in whichever direction, all you see are mountains. Mountains, mountains, everywhere. The Inca were mountain worshippers. They believed the mountains were sacred, the source of all life. And up here, in Machu Picchu, they were as close to those mountain gods as they dared to go. So close, they could almost touch them. These days, Machu Picchu has become a famous centre for New Agers and space cadets of all sorts. They particularly like this mountain-shaped rock, which was put here especially by the Inca to mimic and represent the mountains behind. It's a sacred rock, you have to touch it. And there's another one there. There's another one there. This one here. It's the most famous sculpture in Machu Picchu. It's right at the top of the highest hill. All sorts of people have all sorts of theories about what it represents. Popular theory is that it's some kind of sundial. Others say that it's specially aligned to the various solstices. But I go with the latest theory, which is that like the other mountain-shaped rocks we've seen, it's actually an abstract representation of the mountains behind it. And if you get the alignment right, get the sun in the right place, you'll see that the shapes, the ridge along there, the big peak in the middle, match up. Oh yes, the Inca loved their mountains. They carved them, cut them, shaped them. But their greatest sculptural achievement, the one for which they will always be remembered, is their walls. So beautiful. No mortar, no cement, just carefully, perfectly fitted blocks of individually hand-carved stone. Each one a sculpture in itself that's been carefully shaped and then fitted together like a jigsaw. This effect here, that's called pillow carving. It makes the stone look as if it's been inflated with air from the inside. And this puffy look makes the wall seem somehow weightless. Look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sides. 10-sided stone. This one stone here weighs over 250 tons. How did they get it here? How did they do any of this? Well, it's a remarkable process. If you or I were building a big stone wall, we'd carve the individual bits of stone and pile them up one on top of the other. But that's not how the Inca did it. The Inca chose each stone for each position. And having carved the one underneath, they would lower the one on top backwards and forwards, down and up, onto the stone below. And every time they would see what needed doing. Did they need to carve a bit here? Did they need to add a bit there? Until eventually it all slotted together like this perfect jigsaw. It's a remarkable process. And it worked because these walls have survived the earthquakes of Peru, which are about as big as earthquakes come. I salute the Inca's walls. They're exquisite bits of sculpture. And look how many sculptors who came afterwards have tried to match them. Even the minimalists have had a go. But I see we've drifted off the topic of mountains, and that's wrong. If you're investigating land art, you mustn't forget the mountains. Most places you go in America, the Wild West has clearly finished. But in Arizona, I'm not sure that the news has got through yet. And there's two things that everybody should come to Arizona for. One, the Grand Canyon, of course. Everybody's heard of that. But the second thing you may not have heard of. Roden Crater. Remember that name. It's the largest work of art in the world. If you look through the windscreen over there, you should just see a great big volcano on the horizon. That's Roden Crater. An artist called James Turrell bought that volcano about 30 years ago. He loved it, it's a beautiful thing, but it wasn't quite right for him. So he spent the past 30 years working on it, reshaping it, making it more perfect, and filling it with secret chambers. It hasn't been opened yet, it's not due to open until 2012, but we're getting a sneak preview. James, we're standing right on the rim of the volcano here, and you get a fantastic sense of why this landscape must have appealed to you when you first saw it. Can you talk us back through those early days?
Well, I really wanted to find a space that was a bowl-shaped space held up above the surrounding plain. I had in '74 begun looking, and I flew all the western states, basically from the Rockies to the Pacific and all the way down into Mexico and Chihuahua. I was looking for a space that had its own power. This was my favorite. I saw it on a November day, at the end of the day, so that the sun was strongly on the western side of it. And it just looked fantastic as I saw it come into view. I was flying on the north side of the peaks here, coming at an east-west direction. And so I landed out down below and then spent the night here at the crater, and then went in to see the ownership and what the story was. It wasn't for sale. He said he bought land, he didn't sell it. But I went and saw him every Friday for 3 years when he paid his cowboys. So I got a lease on it in, I think it's 76. I've just moved 1.4 million cubic yards, and it hardly looks like I've done anything. Welcome to Jim's world.
Wow.
This is the sun and moon space here, where it actually, this side is the sun, the furthest north sunrise. The opposite side is the moon, the furthest south moon set. So it's north sunrise and south moon set.
So the white disc that's in the middle of the stone here will be like a moving projection screen almost. And on it you'll be able to see the sun rising, and on the other side we'll see the moon.
Yes, yes. So when you come here, those are the kinds of things you will experience.
Well, this is essentially like a giant pinhole camera here, isn't it?
Yes, it's actually like a giant telescope. These are gestures to events that do come, but come regularly. What you'll see is spaces that are set up for certain events, awaiting them, but it's also possible to make things that won't be experienced in my lifetime, but I know where they'll happen.
How deep down in the volcano are we?
We're 120 feet underneath the top of the crater.
So we're heading up to what looks like a giant keyhole.
Yes, that it is. Now, what was the circle becomes an ellipse.
So if you stare up, you can just see the circle stretching. Strange feeling. It's like animation.
It's quite wonderful. Artists and architects are making all these structures and things that we inhabit to have these feelings, to have a sense of awe than anything that's said or read in them. So this has always been the territory of art. We have this relationship to the cosmos. It affects us physically as the tides do and planting cycles, as well as the cycle of women and fertility. I mean, it's quite amazing, and yet we have lost some of that understanding. Intellectually we know it, but we don't really feel it that well.
This chamber down here is called the East Portal, and I think it's the most spectacular of all the chambers in the volcano. You come out of a dark tunnel, and there in front of you is this golden staircase leading right up to the sky. And when you come up the golden staircase, you look around and you find you come out right in the middle of the volcano's bowl. What I also like, when you look back down again, there's a blue circle in the ground that looks exactly like the Earth, as the Earth must have looked when Neil Armstrong looked back down on it from the moon. It's a kind of God's eye view of the Earth.
You know, part of this is to take something awesome, this idea of coming to grips with the whole sky, the entire cosmos, and yet have it feel somewhat personal, that is a space that's for you. You know, we are a part of nature, and one of our greatest conceits is to feel apart from it. We have this great hubris to think that we own a piece of the earth when we buy it and have these certificates of sale and ownership and all that, but that's sort of like a fly thinking he owns the banana it lights on.
Flies on a banana. I suppose that does sound like us. But at least sculpture gives us a shot at eternity. Long after we're gone, our land art will still be there. There are a million stories in the world of sculpture. This has been a few of them. Hello, this is Valdemar Januszczak, art critic, producer and presenter of documentaries. Thanks for watching Perspective, YouTube's home for classical art.
Here is the equivalent of £600,000 and 20, and 620,000, 650, and 620,000. 650 is the Chris, and 650, 850, 700,000.
You've just seen an old record being set, £750,000. It's the most ever paid for a letter. It's a kind of madness, really. It's mainly for Van Gogh. He's our favourite artist. We spend millions on him, but we don't know that much about him. Not really. Yet the full story of Vincent van Gogh is a tale worth hearing.
Starry, starry night, paint your palette blue and gray. Look out on summer's day, eyes that you want to witness just how dramatically
the world has taken leading senses when it comes to Vincent van Gogh. I recommend a visit to his hometown of Zundert. This is the famous flower festival they have here. And all these floats, made of millions and millions and millions of flowers, are dedicated to Vincent. Tens of thousands of people have turned up to see them. Now, I like flowers too, and the effort that's gone into creating these things is unimaginable. I mean, look at that. It's fantastic. But unfortunately, all this has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with the real Vincent van Gogh. Vincent would have hated it. Van Gogh's father was the preacher here in Zundert, Pastor Theodorus van Gogh of the Dutch Reformed Church. If you look down from the pulpit, there's a little brass bowl. That's the font in which Vincent was christened in 1853. A noisy little boy with red hair, Vincent Willem van Gogh, the first of 6 children, all christened in this church, all by their own father. actually a Catholic Brabant, a tiny bit of Holland that pokes into Belgium. It's Belgium, really. So the Van Goghs were surrounded by Catholics. The Protestant community here is tiny. It kept them close. They were outcasts together, pioneers. That house behind me, the bright yellow one, that's the house Vincent grew up in. It's not the real one, of course. It's one they recreated out of half a million dahlias. They like growing flowers here in Zundert. But he did actually live just a little bit up the road in that house there. That's been rebuilt too, but it stands in exactly the place that Vincent spent the first 16 years of his life. It's rather touching to be here. And something I didn't know, I didn't realise till I got here. He did an early drawing. There are about 12 of his early drawings left. And there's one of this rather strange architectural feature. It looks like a capital of a church or a bank or something. And no one really knew where it was. And I certainly didn't know where it was. Then you come here and you realise that actually it's a capital at the top of the town hall in Zunda, across the road. He must have sat there in his bedroom, looked straight out of the window and seen this pilaster in front of him. So what it actually is the first of the drawings that Vincent did of the view from his bedroom window, this funny little pilaster. And it's a habit he kept up all his life. Every room he ever stayed in, he would draw what's outside of it. And it began here, as everything did.
Starry, starry night, paint your palette blue and grey. Look out on a summer's day, with eyes that melt the darkness in my soul. Shadows on hills, sketchy trees and daffodils.
Vincent had been deliberately named after his uncle, another Vincent van Gogh, a hugely successful art dealer whom everyone called Uncle Cent. When Vincent was 16, he was packed off to The Hague, where Uncle Cent had a gallery. He was going to be an art dealer too. Vincent had a special poster created for him as an apprentice clerk at the Hague branch of Goupil & Co., the world's most prestigious art franchise, who'd merged with Uncle Cent. It was a behind-the-scenes job at first, dealing with Goupil's extensive international paperwork. Amazingly, Van Gogh turned out to be good at this and was soon promoted to front of shop. Rich Hague clients would turn up here in their carriages. They'd be met by the teenage Vincent van Gogh, who'd escort Sir and Madam inside and commend them on their taste when Sir and Madam decided on their purchase. This is the three-volume correspondence of Vincent to his brother Theo. It's the biggest, heaviest, and most celebrated epistolic package in art. I've tackled it a couple of times now, and it took me several months each go. Vincent's almost as famous for writing these letters as he is for painting the sunflowers. There's so much insight here into his creative thinking. But the very first letter was just a brief note about the weather, scribbled to Theo from The Hague in September 1872.
Theo was a couple of years younger than Vincent, but he also decided to become an art dealer while Vincent was here. They hoped one day they might work together. But on the 17th of March, 1873, a rather glum Vincent wrote to Theo to tell him that he was going to be moved.
It was another promotion. He'd done so well in The Hague that he was being sent to London. He was 20. He arrived at Victoria Station on the 19th of May, 1873, and soon found some lodging somewhere in Battersea. He spoke decent English, it quickly improved. Within weeks, he was reading Keats. London came at him from all sides. It was the largest city in the world, and 4 million people had somehow squeezed themselves into it. Here's what it looked like. This is Gustave Doré's London, published just before Vincent got here. Look at the state of it. This is Ludgate Hill, looking up towards St. Paul's. Look at those crowds. Vincent
Vincent had a copy of this and treasured it. You might recognise this image as well. It's Newgate Prison. 2 decades later, he still hadn't forgotten it. Vincent described his first year in London as the happiest of his life. He went boating on the Thames, he visited the museums, the parks. But what really cheered him up was moving here, to 87 Hackford Road, Brixton, where Vincent had a room at the top that he loved. I don't need to tell you what Brixton is today. It's yardie country, dangerous. But it wasn't like that in Vincent's time. In 1873, this was a prosperous middle-class suburb. No one knew where Vincent lived in London until 1971, when a postman, a Van Gogh obsessive called Paul Chalcroft, tracked him down to this house. Chalcroft was on strike at the time, getting ready for the 3-day week, with lots of hours on his hands. There's a Mrs. Smith living here now, and I imagine it was a heck of a surprise when the striking postman knocked on her door and told her that Van Gogh lived here. You must be Mrs. Smith.
Hello, good morning.
Do you know, I've read so much about you and about this house.
You're welcome.
I really want to ask you, right?
Come through.
What was it like when
The
postman turned up, the striking postman?
Paul
Paul Shalcroft.
It's very exciting, actually.
Is that
Is that what it is?
And that's Paul Shalcroft too.
I mean, he was
He was obsessed with
He
Vincent,
was
wasn't he?
absolutely knew everything about Vincent from the day he was born to the day when. In fact, his wife said, I don't know where to put all these pictures driving Van Gogh, she's driving balmy. Not a bit like it was when he was here.
Well, it
Well, it's still be more or less the same. You've sort of fenced in the stairs, haven't you?
I did. This was the room we slept in.
This one
This one
here.
here.
This one here, two windows. That's all the paintings in there.
There's
The church.
That's right. That's Paul Shalcroft's work for him.
And
Do you sleep here now, Mrs. Smith? Is this your bedroom?
Yes.
So you
Do you sleep in the room that Van Gogh said?
Yes, I do. I can't hear him snoring at all.
Lucky you.
No.
I bet he did.
His
His landlady, Mrs. Ursula Lawyer, ran a small school here. She also took lodgers. Vincent was working in Covent Garden, Goupil's London office. And every morning he walked to work in a top hat he bought specially. He thought it made him look more English. This journey to Covent Garden took him 45 minutes, and that's not easy. Van Gogh was a ridiculously fast walker. He shot past the oval where the English played that strange game called cricket.
He didn't
Enjoy the fog. It depressed him. And the river, pumped full of sewage, used to stink so badly he hurried across it. But he loved this view over Westminster Bridge. The House of Parliament just built. The Thames embankment, newly reclaimed from 32 acres of mud.
And he couldn't
Couldn't have missed poverty. You know that expression, slumming it? Well, slumming was something Londoners used to do in Vincent's time. It means going to look at the slums. The worst ones were in the East End, Whitechapel, Bethnal Green, terrifying places, underage prostitutes lurking in the alleys, and an unbuilt sewage system pumping crap into the streets.
I know you won't believe this, but I really did that. It took me 53 minutes. That's 8 minutes more than Vincent. And he used to do it twice a day, strolling to work, strolling back. He worked just there at Goupil's, which is a noodle restaurant now. He was basically selling prints and earning £90 a year, which is actually a very good salary in those days. about 3 times the average payment for a labourer. Van Gogh's favourite English writer was Dickens. He read most of the novels and then reread them. He was always quoting Dickens in his letters, gobbling up Dickens's sympathy for the London poor, all those blighted Oliver Twists scrounging in the streets. Dickens opened Vincent's eyes to modern human misery. Dickens died in 1870, just before Vincent got here. To commemorate his death, one of Vincent's favourite Victorian sentimentalists, Luke Fildes, produced an unforgettable image of Dickens's empty chair pushed away from his desk. Vincent bought this illustration and learned from it how an empty chair can stand in so poignantly for a missing person. Haunted by this image, Vincent went on to become the greatest painter of empty chairs there's ever been.
And to your hue is changing, I tune my subtle song. I tune my subtle song.
Vincent's landlady in Brixton, Mrs. Lawyer, had a daughter, Eugenie, who was 19, a year younger than Vincent. Perhaps the chief reason why he enjoyed his first year in London so much was because Eugenie was here. Vincent fell for her all the way. He was besotted. What's extraordinary is that he didn't tell her he was in love with her for almost a year. He kept it bottled up. He let it fester. Vincent never said a word. When it finally came out, an amazed Eugenie informed him that she was already secretly engaged to a previous lodger, an engineer called Samuel Ploughman. The effect on Vincent of this firm and terrible rejection was devastating. When Eugenie rejected him, Vincent did what many before him have done and will always do. He found religion. He didn't have to look very far. It was already there in his blood, his upbringing. He started reading the Bible at nights, puffing away at his pipe, coming home early from work. He'd go to Salvation Army meetings at Elephant and Castle, hang around the soup kitchens and the prayer halls, sinking ever deeper into a melancholy love stupor. His work was now going so badly that his bosses decided to transfer him again to Paris. This is the old Goupil headquarters in Paris, where Vincent was made head of pictures. He didn't deserve it, so it can only have been intended as a deliberate confidence booster. It's for sale now. It's been turned into a loft.
So you're coming in the gallery Goupil?
As head of pictures, Vincent was the chief salesman here. The way it was supposed to work was that Vincent would greet the rich clients, commend them on their taste, and sell them the most expensive stuff on the walls. Simple, but it didn't work out like that. The new religious Vincent chose instead to question their taste, argue with them, and suggest they buy some proper landscapes instead of the salon nonsenses that were hanging all around them here. It was actually a fascinating time in the Parisian art world. A few months before Vincent was transferred here, a bunch of disaffected artistic rebels, whom cruel critics had dubbed the Impressionists, had opened and closed their first show. But Vincent was too immersed in his new obsession with the Bible to take any notice of them whatsoever. Vincent had found a room up here in Montmartre. Montmartre means the Hill of Martyrs, and a martyr is definitely what he now fancied himself to be. He spent every evening up in that little room, reading the Bible and praying feverishly. Get rid of all your books, he wrote to Theo, and keep only the Bible. Goupil employees were expected to work over Christmas. It was the busiest selling period of the year. But without telling anybody, Vincent bunked off at Christmas that year and spent it in Holland with his family. When he returned to Paris, he was summoned into the boss's office and asked to resign.
Okay, merci.
Goupils gave him 3 months' notice, which was generous of them. Vincent had been reading the English papers in Paris, looking through the classifieds for a job. He eventually found one here in Ramsgate, teaching French, German, arithmetic and dictation to young boys at a school opened in this building by a Mr. William Stokes. This job was unpaid, just board and lodging, but he was teaching, and that pressed Vincent's vocational buzzer. The school was crummy, Dickensian, one might say. The floors of the bedroom in which the boys slept were rotten, the windows broken. And Vincent complained desperately about the bed bugs. He did a couple of drawings out of the school window of this view. They're rather delightful. Stokes turned out to be entirely unreliable. Just 2 months after he got here, Vincent learned that the school was closing and moving to Isleworth, a London suburb where Stokes promised Vincent a proper job. Vincent decided to walk there and to visit his sister on the way, who was teaching in Welwyn, a mere 100 miles away. Vincent got there in 3 days.
I've got a pal, a regular out and outer. She's a dear old girl. Oh, I'll tell you all about her.
This walking business wasn't just a case of saving on rail fares. He was driven to do it by the religious mania that was growing in him. He'd been reading Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan. It affected him immediately. He wasn't a penniless Dutch teacher walking to see his sister. He was a humble pilgrim, making his difficult way in life. It's a feeling Vincent never lost. And did any man ever show as much affection for his trusty boots as Vincent, years later, went on to show?
A lady living in their land, else I'd swap for my dear old Dutch. There ain't a lady living in the land that I'd swap for my dear old Dutch.
Stokes' school in Isleworth turned out to be another no-hoper. But just down the Twickenham Road was another boys' school run by the Reverend Thomas Slade Jones, a congregational minister, the first man ever to understand fully Vincent's religious passion. The Reverend was one of the few heroes of Vincent's life. He gave him a job at this school and paid him. It was in this house that Vincent's frantic Bible reading and growing religious mania finally found an outlet. He decided he wanted to be some sort of missionary. Teaching wasn't enough for him. He thought about going up north to work among the poor in the dark satanic mills. But there was quite enough poverty to be getting on with in London, where a man with a religious mission could find plenty to do.
These are the minute books of the Turnham Green Congregational Church for 1876. And look who's in them, named as a new church worker, an assistant preacher, Mr. Van Gogh. Look at the spelling, it's wrong. That's why he began calling himself Vincent. He was fed up with the English getting his name wrong.
As Mr. Richardson proposed, Mr. Stembridge seconded,
that Mr. Vincent van Gogh, spelt G-O-F, be accepted as a co-worker.
The Reverend Slade Jones, pestered mightily, one imagines, by Mr. Van Gogh, and boy could Mr. Van Gogh pester, was finally persuaded to allow Vincent to step across that crucial religious divide that separates the sheep from the shepherds. On the 29th of October, 1876, on a sunny autumn Sunday, Vincent rose before the faithful at the Richmond Methodist Chapel in suburban West London and delivered his first sermon. We still have it. We know exactly what he said to his first congregation. It's an old belief and a good belief that our life is a pilgrim's progress, that we are strangers on the earth, but that it's long, well-meaning, repetitive, boring. Every few sentences, it resorts to thick bundles of biblical quotation and would have left many of us dozing in the aisles. The most impressive thing about it for me is that it's in English, a language he'd mastered so quickly. He must have had help writing it, perhaps from the Reverend Slade Jones. On the road walks a pilgrim, staff in hand. He's been walking for a good long while. Since none of us has time to listen to it all, let me tell you that its main theme was pilgrimage. Life is tough, the road is long, but faith in God will see us through. And it all feels sneakily autobiographical. Further ahead in our story, after some turbulent religious times, the preacher who stood up here and delivered his first sermon was to give up religion rather fiercely and claim to despise it. But one of the keys to understanding the real Van Gogh is to realise that once all this has soaked into his art, it could never be removed. Never. That Christmas, Vincent went home to his family. He said he'd return to London after the holidays, but he never did. Whatever promises he'd made to his new flock in England, his family forced him to break. Instead of returning to Isleworth after Christmas, Vincent was packed off to this cute little town, Dordrecht, where his family had come up with a new calling for him. He was going to be a bookseller. His boss was to be a Mr. Braat, and the bookshop stood right there where that cafe is. Actually, I can easily imagine Vincent as an eccentric book dealer. His family always remembered him with his nose stuck in a book, and later he'd go on to paint books with such love and excitement. It didn't matter how humble a book was, Vincent's art always stressed its preciousness. The booksellers I know tend to be scruffy, cranky, unwashed types, lost in their own world, just like Vincent. He would sit in the corner wearing his English top hat, ignoring the customers, as booksellers do, and busying himself with the remarkable task he'd set himself here in Dordrecht. Vincent, remember, spoke 4 languages fluently, and he decided to produce a translation of the Bible in all of them simultaneously. Dutch, French, German and English. He divided his paper into 4 columns and inched his way through the Bible in 4 languages at once. This is a painting he did some years later of his father's Bible. It's still being used in Zundert. The book-selling job didn't work out, of course. Vincent was still determined to join the church, like his father and his grandfather. Amsterdam University had a 6-year theology course, and Pastor Theodorus fixed it for his son to get on it, providing he passed some exams in Latin and Greek. Vincent, alas, turned out to be unusually hopeless at both of them. Something unsettling happened here in Amsterdam, something I find disturbing. If Vincent's studies weren't going well, he used to punish himself by picking up a cudgel and beating himself across the back until he bled. And on particularly cold nights, he used to come home late, deliberately, so that the door to this house would be locked, and he'd be forced to spend the night outside, shivering. These were weird habits, and perhaps they were habits he never lost. Vincent never made it onto the theology course. He dropped out. The only religious calling still open to someone as unqualified as him was to become a missionary, the lowest of the low. A place called Laken in Belgium had a training school for evangelists, which he failed to get into, of course. But a kindly teacher at this school, the Reverend Peterson, remember that name, liked something about him and arranged for Vincent to be given a trial period ministering to the miners in the notorious Borinage. The Borinage's geographic nickname hereabouts is the Black Earth Country. It's a bleak industrial stretch of slag heaps and mine workings straddling the border between France and Belgium, spoiling the land on both sides. He'd looked up the Borinage in an encyclopedia, and this encyclopedia informed him that this was a happy working community, populated by a race of friendly miners who descended into the earth every day, content in the knowledge that they were being useful and serving God. But that's in the encyclopedia. In real life, the Borinage was hell on earth. And while the mine owners back in Brussels were coining it, the poor sods stuck here were leading some of the grimmest lives available to man in so-called civilized Europe. Vincent's duties as a preacher were twofold. Here in Wham, where he lodged in the interesting pink house behind me, there was also a converted dance hall that was used as a makeshift Protestant chapel. Vincent preached there to the few miners who turned up and their families, and he'd deliver his notoriously long sermons. He would also do the rounds of the miners' houses and conduct Bible classes there, communal gospel readings. Thus he found out exactly how the miners were living, and it appalled him. There's a trait we need to keep an eye on with Vincent. It's a powerful urge, a recurring one, to hurt himself. He wanted to do more with the miners than just conduct their Bible classes. He needed also to share their misery. So he began giving away his food and his clothes too, starving himself, shivering in the cold, just like them. He even stopped washing so that he too, like the miners, was stained a permanent black. Now in this community, grim though it was, the preacher was still someone you looked up to. Mrs. Denis, the landlady of the house here, complained about him not washing. "Oh, Esther," he replied, "don't worry about the details. They don't matter in heaven." Vincent persuaded one of the older miners to take him down into a pit, and he described the experience in a particularly evocative letter to Theo. Down in the mine shaft, the diggings were arranged like a beehive, with one cramped chamber next to another, inside each of which a pathetic black figure would be picking away at the walls. Pick, pick, pick. Vincent was surprised to find horses down here, tragic beasts fated to spend their days trudging backwards and forwards, pulling the carts. There were 8-year-old kids as well, small enough to squeeze into any hole. I was wondering why missionaries were being sent to the Borinage at all. I mean, it's hardly the deepest Congo, and Brussels is only a few hours away. I found the answer here, in Germinal by Émile Zola. It's the finest mining novel ever written, and it's set on the French side of the Borinage. Read page 45, and you'll see that there were women down here too. With their smaller bodies, they too could squeeze into tighter spaces. But it was hot, and they didn't wear much. Zola describes how a miner coming around a dark corner encountered the immensely tempting sight of one of these young girls, down on her hands and knees with her back to him. I won't go on. But this is why they sent the missionaries to the Borinage, to preach against promiscuity and sin. And it's true, every sliver of symbolism you encounter in these mines feels satanic and hellish. Remember, Vincent was on trial here. His appointment as a preacher was temporary. He wanted it renewed, but it depended on his performance. After he'd been here about 6 months, they sent someone down from Brussels to inspect him. The Reverend Roche-Dieu was his name. Roche-Dieu in French means the Rock of God, a terrifying name. And this terrifying Roche-Dieu discovered Vincent starving, filthy, unkempt, manically identifying with the miners, and recommended that he be sacked. Vincent's example, reported Roche-Dieu, was a bad one. Vincent was devastated, absolutely devastated. He'd already been brutally rejected in love, and now the church